Evelyn Carter was known for her gentle nature and quiet strength, but behind closed doors, she lived a life of fear. Marcus Carter, the town's respected firefighter, was her husband and her tormentor. When she vanished without a trace, what appeared to be a tragic disappearance unraveled into a chilling tale of abuse, silence, and a hidden truth that shocked the entire community. This is not just a story about what was lost. It's about the scars that don't fade, and the courage it takes to confront them. Evelyn Carter was known by everyone in her quiet Oregon town as a kind and dependable woman. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, where patients often asked for her by name. She always had a calm presence and a soft smile, the kind that put people at ease. She rarely talked about herself, choosing instead to focus on others, always helping, always listening. People admired her dedication, and some even envied what seemed like a perfect life. She had a steady career, a beautiful home, and a husband who was viewed as a hero in the community. But what no one saw behind closed doors was the fear Evelyn lived with every single day. Her husband, Marcus Carter, was once celebrated as a firefighter who risked his life to save children from a burning building. That act made him a local legend. People greeted him with admiration in grocery stores, thanked him during parades, and invited him to community events. He soaked up the praise, always charming, always smiling. To the outside world, he was a symbol of strength and selflessness. But inside his own home, Marcus was someone else entirely. Marcus was controlling, manipulative, and often angry without warning. Over time, his charm had faded, and what replaced it was a cold, watchful presence that hovered around Evelyn like a storm cloud. He criticized everything: how she cooked, how she dressed, even how she walked. He controlled her money, her phone, and her time. Her social life slowly disappeared. Calls to friends became fewer until they stopped completely. Marcus told her who she could see, where she could go, and how long she could be out. And when Evelyn tried to push back, he reminded her that no one would believe her. After all, he was Marcus Carter, the town's hero. Evelyn hid her bruises well. She wore long sleeves, even in July. She applied makeup carefully. She smiled when people asked how she was doing. At work, she stayed busy, never letting anyone see the fear underneath. She told herself things would get better, that maybe Marcus would change. But the violence only got worse. What started as yelling turned into pushing. Then it became slapping. Then came the night he threw her against a table hard enough to fracture her ribs. Evelyn never told anyone. Instead, she went to work the next day with a tight bandage under her scrubs and said she slipped in the shower. It was Olivia Traynor, their neighbor across the street, who first noticed something odd. Olivia had lived there for 10 years and often saw Evelyn outside tending to her small garden. But lately, she hadn't seen her at all. No early morning watering, no weekend trips to the mailbox. Olivia brushed it off at first, thinking maybe Evelyn was working longer hours. But then she noticed the same mail piling up day after day, and Evelyn's car hadn't moved. 2 days later, Evelyn didn't show up to her night shift at the hospital. Her supervisor called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. A second day passed with no word. That's when Olivia called the police. It wasn't panic, just a quiet concern. Maybe Evelyn was sick or had left town unexpectedly. But when officers arrived at the Carter home, they sensed something was wrong the moment they stepped inside. The front door was unlocked. The living room was in disarray, cushions off the couch, a vase shattered on the floor. In the kitchen, a trail of small blood drops led from the counter to the back door. Evelyn's phone was found smashed on the floor, and her purse was left behind, its contents still inside. Her car keys were on the table, and her car was in the driveway. There was no sign of a robbery, no sign of a struggle that involved anyone else. It was as if she had simply vanished. Marcus told police he had no idea where she was. He claimed they'd had an argument and she left. He said she often left after fights to clear her head and insisted she'd be back. But his tone was flat, and he seemed more annoyed than concerned. He couldn't remember what they argued about, and when asked why he didn't report her missing, he shrugged. He said it wasn't unusual for her to disappear for a while when she was upset, but Evelyn had never gone missing before. She had never missed work without calling, and she had never, ever left her phone behind. Detective Jonah Reed, who had worked on domestic cases for over a decade, was assigned to investigate. From the start, something didn't sit right with him. The timeline was fuzzy. Marcus's story had inconsistencies. And most of all, the house didn't feel like a place where someone had just walked out in anger. It felt like something had happened. Something violent. Something final. The community was shocked. How could Evelyn be missing? How could someone like Marcus be involved in something like this? People whispered, but few believed he could really be responsible. He was the town's hero, after all, the man who saved children. But Detective Reed had seen enough to know that sometimes the most dangerous people were the ones who knew how to wear a perfect mask. And now, his job was to find Evelyn Carter, dead or alive, and uncover what really happened in the house that everyone thought was so perfect. Detective Jonah Reed spent the first few days of the investigation piecing together Evelyn Carter's life, starting with the hours leading up to her disappearance. Every corner of the Carter home was examined, every drawer opened, every object studied. Forensics took samples from the blood drops in the kitchen and dusted for prints, though none pointed to an intruder. Her smashed phone offered little information, and the home's surveillance system, which Marcus claimed hadn't worked in years, was indeed offline. Jonah requested security footage from surrounding homes, hoping one of the neighbors might have captured something. Only one camera from a house down the street showed part of the Carter driveway. In the footage, nothing stood out. Evelyn's car remained parked. No one suspicious appeared, but the timestamps showed a dark window between midnight and 3 a.m. Too quiet, too still. Jonah's next step was interviews. He sat down with Marcus Carter first. Marcus kept a tight posture and offered clipped answers. He said Evelyn had been acting strange lately, distant, moody, and withdrawn. He claimed they had a small argument the night she vanished. He said she packed a small bag and left, though he admitted he didn't see where she went. When asked why he didn't report her missing, he said he thought she needed space. But as Jonah dug deeper, patterns began to emerge. Evelyn's co-workers described her as someone who never took unplanned time off, never left without notice. Her bank account hadn't been touched since she disappeared, and her credit cards were dormant. She hadn't accessed her email, and her phone remained inactive. To Jonah, that didn't look like someone who had simply walked away. It looked like someone who was taken. The interviews revealed even more disturbing details. A nurse named Carla, who had worked with Evelyn for 5 years, hesitantly admitted that she once saw a bruise on Evelyn's wrist. When she asked about it, Evelyn brushed it off. Another co-worker remembered Evelyn being anxious one night when her shift ran late, checking the time repeatedly and saying she needed to get home before Marcus did. None of these moments raised alarms before, but now, in the context of her disappearance, they painted a darker picture. Jonah returned to the house and revisited the kitchen. Something kept pulling him back to the blood trail. The forensic report confirmed it was Evelyn's blood, but the pattern suggested more than a minor injury. It wasn't a small cut. It looked like she had been hurt badly, possibly dragged. The trail stopped near the back door, where the lock was damaged slightly, as if it had been forced or kicked. He ordered a full search of the woods behind the Carter property. Dogs were brought in. Officers combed through every path and dense patch of trees. They found tire tracks leading into a secluded trail off the main road, partially hidden by brush. The tracks were deep, likely made by a heavy vehicle. Not far from the end of that trail, officers found something, a broken bracelet, caked in mud. It matched one Evelyn was known to wear, a gift from a patient's family. The discovery shifted the tone of the investigation. This wasn't a voluntary disappearance. This was something far more serious. And Marcus's explanations no longer held weight. Jonah searched through Marcus's background. His fire department record was spotless, full of commendations and awards. But a deeper look revealed something buried. An old restraining order, filed by a former girlfriend, back when Marcus was in his early 20s. The case never went to court, and the record was sealed. But the complaint had chilling similarities: control, emotional abuse, threats. It was a side of Marcus no one had seen publicly, but it added a layer of concern that couldn't be ignored. While the investigation intensified, the community wrestled with the idea that their local hero might not be who they believed he was. Some defended Marcus, insisting the police were wasting time. Others grew uneasy, remembering moments that suddenly seemed suspicious. A neighbor recalled Evelyn crying in her car once, thinking she had just had a bad day. Another remembered seeing her rush back inside one evening after Marcus pulled into the driveway. Jonah compiled a timeline of Evelyn's last known movements. She left work at 10:12 p.m., stopped briefly at a gas station, and arrived home around 10:45. A receipt from the gas station confirmed the purchase of a bottle of water and a small snack. Security footage from the station captured her looking tired, but otherwise calm. That was the last confirmed sighting. What happened after she walked through her front door remained the central mystery. But as Jonah followed every thread, he felt more certain of one thing: Evelyn hadn't left on her own. Someone had tried to make her disappear. And the person most likely to know why was the man insisting she simply needed space. Jonah pushed for a warrant to search Marcus's truck. It had been wiped clean, but forensic teams found faint traces of blood under the lining of the cargo bed. Preliminary testing suggested a match to Evelyn. That evidence opened the case wide. Marcus was no longer just a person of interest. He was now a suspect. What began as a missing person case was shifting into something darker. And Evelyn Carter, whose gentle presence had once seemed like a footnote in a small town, had now become the center of a storm that revealed the terrifying secrets hidden behind familiar smiles and closed doors. The search for Evelyn Carter intensified after the blood found in Marcus Carter's truck tested positive as a match. With this critical piece of evidence, Detective Jonah Reed moved quickly to obtain a second warrant, this time for the Carter family's storage unit, located on the outskirts of town. According to records, Marcus had rented the unit 6 months prior, citing it as a place to store old furniture. But he had been visiting the location more frequently in recent weeks, often late at night. That detail, once meaningless, now looked suspicious. When the team arrived at the unit, they found the interior meticulously arranged. Boxes labeled with dates and room names were stacked neatly along the walls. But in the far corner, beneath a dusty tarp, they discovered something chilling: a large, stained rug wrapped in plastic. The dark blotches weren't immediately identifiable, but they didn't look like old coffee spills. Forensics later confirmed they were blood stains, consistent with blunt force trauma. It was more proof that something violent had happened to Evelyn. Also in the unit was a duffel bag containing women's clothes, some of which were torn. A pair of shoes belonging to Evelyn were identified, along with a notebook she used for work. It became increasingly clear that Marcus hadn't just been hiding her, he had planned this. The presence of her belongings in the unit meant the disposal was deliberate, calculated. He hadn't lost control in a moment of rage. He had prepared for something like this. Jonah brought Marcus back in for questioning, but this time under formal suspicion. Marcus denied everything, insisted he had no idea how the blood got in his truck or why Evelyn's things were in the storage unit. He claimed she may have planted them there before she left, that maybe she was trying to frame him. The explanations were flimsy and increasingly erratic. He showed signs of nervousness, tapping his foot, clenching his fists, but never broke. He seemed convinced that the town's loyalty to him would hold strong, but cracks in his image began to appear. More people came forward, recounting odd encounters with Marcus. A former colleague from the fire department mentioned that Marcus had a temper, something management had quietly addressed after a heated argument on a call. A gym trainer recalled seeing bruises on Marcus's arms and chest weeks before Evelyn's disappearance. Bruises that Marcus had explained away as training injuries. Even his own brother, Stephen Carter, reluctantly told police that Marcus had always been controlling, even as a child. Stephen described their upbringing as tense, filled with discipline and silence, with Marcus often punishing their younger siblings for minor missteps. All these accounts painted a picture not of a beloved community hero, but of a man who knew how to control appearances, who knew how to hide behind his public persona. Jonah was beginning to believe that Evelyn had tried to escape once before, quietly, maybe without even telling anyone, but that Marcus had found out. That theory gained traction when Evelyn's co-worker Carla remembered something crucial. A day weeks before the disappearance, when Evelyn asked about apartment listings. She seemed hopeful, even excited, but also cautious. She said she was getting things in order. She never brought it up again. Jonah traced Evelyn's online activity and discovered that she had been secretly searching for domestic abuse support groups and temporary housing shelters. Her laptop revealed emails drafted but never sent, letters to friends, even to her parents, explaining what she was going through. But the emails were saved as drafts, not sent. Maybe she had second thoughts. Maybe she was afraid Marcus would find out. Either way, it confirmed the most important thing. Evelyn had been planning to leave him. The more Jonah learned, the more it became evident that Marcus had sensed Evelyn's intent. For someone so obsessed with control, the idea of her leaving might have triggered the violence. Jonah theorized that on the night of her disappearance, Evelyn confronted Marcus or tried to escape. The blood in the kitchen, the fractured lock, the trail ending at the back door. It all suggested a struggle. She may have made it outside, possibly even to the woods behind their property, but Marcus caught her. Cadaver dogs were brought in again to search the trail near the woods and the area surrounding the storage facility. They picked up a faint scent in a clearing near the creek, half a mile from the Carter residence. There, buried under loose soil and leaves, they found more evidence: a torn piece of fabric from Evelyn's uniform and a broken phone case. The search continued deeper into the forest as teams worked around the clock. Back at the station, Jonah reviewed every hour of Marcus's movements in the days following Evelyn's disappearance. Traffic cameras, credit card receipts, fuel station, logs, they all helped form a clearer picture. There was a suspicious visit to a remote construction site 2 days after Evelyn went missing. The site had since been cleared for new development, but investigators marked it as a location for further digging. Jonah knew they were close. The evidence was stacking, the truth rising from the lies Marcus had carefully constructed. But without a body, they couldn't charge him with murder. Still, Jonah remained focused. His instincts told him they were on the edge of something, just one piece away from solving the puzzle, and far from fading. The scars Evelyn carried in silence were now beginning to speak. Through the trail she left behind, fragments of a life. Stolen too soon, Jonah was determined to bring justice for a woman who had lived in fear, but who had never stopped trying to find her way to freedom. Detective Jonah Reed continued to chase the one piece of the puzzle that remained missing: Evelyn Carter herself. Without a body, the case remained circumstantial, and Marcus Carter's defense team was already preparing to discredit the evidence. They argued that the storage unit could have been accessed by anyone, that Evelyn's blood in the truck was from an old injury, and that she had willingly disappeared. But Jonah knew otherwise. Every detail uncovered hinted at a woman desperate to break free, and a man who couldn't let go without destruction. The construction site Marcus had visited became a primary focus. The area had been partially excavated and filled again just days after Evelyn vanished. Heavy equipment had disturbed much of the soil, making it difficult to pinpoint anomalies. Still, A forensic team moved in with ground-penetrating radar, scanning layer by layer. It took hours, but eventually, they found a spot where the soil density didn't match the surrounding area. It was deeper than expected, almost as if someone had buried something, and then gone to great lengths to cover it with layers of rock and compacted earth. A week later, after carefully digging through the site, investigators uncovered the remains of a body wrapped in a tarp. Time and decomposition had erased many features, but a small bracelet, mud-stained and clinging to the wrist, matched the one Evelyn wore the day she vanished. Dental records confirmed it. Evelyn had been found. The quiet woman who had once cared for the town's sick and elderly had been hidden under layers of dirt, as if someone had hoped she'd never be seen again. The town of Oak Ridge was shaken. Evelyn's story spread quickly. News crews camped outside the police station. Community groups organized vigils, and social media flooded with posts remembering her warmth and kindness. Many admitted they wished they had noticed the signs sooner. Some had seen the bruises, heard the tension in her voice, or watched her retreat from public life in the months leading up to her death. All those red flags now felt like regrets. Jonah, however, had no time for reflection. He submitted the new forensic evidence and pushed for a warrant to arrest Marcus for murder. With Evelyn's body recovered, the case had crossed a threshold. Marcus's calm demeanor cracked when officers arrived at his home with handcuffs. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as their once revered firefighter was escorted into a police cruiser, his expression no longer proud, but hollow. The trial began 2 months later. It was the biggest in Oak Ridge's history. The courtroom overflowed with spectators, reporters and supporters wearing purple ribbons to honor domestic abuse victims. The prosecution presented a compelling case. Blood evidence, Evelyn's personal items hidden in storage, the forensic trail from the house to the woods, and the discovery of her remains. Jonah's testimony was central, laying out the timeline and connecting the dots with chilling precision. The defense leaned on character witnesses, trying to portray Marcus as a respected community figure, someone incapable of murder. But their efforts faltered when Evelyn's co-workers and friends spoke. Their voices shook as they described her fear, her isolation, and the pain she masked behind a gentle smile. The restraining order from Marcus's past was unsealed and admitted into evidence, revealing a long-buried history of control and aggression. Suddenly, the illusion of Marcus as a hero began to unravel. Perhaps the most damning moment came when forensic analysts detailed the injuries found on Evelyn's remains. The trauma wasn't accidental or impulsive. It was brutal. The prosecution argued that Marcus had planned her death as a final act of domination, an attempt to erase the one person who threatened his control. The storage unit, the burial site, the cleaned truck. They all spoke of intention. Jonah sat quietly through much of the proceedings, observing the reactions of those who had once admired Marcus. It was difficult to watch the town reckon with its misplaced trust. But more than anything, Jonah wanted justice for Evelyn. Not just for her, but for anyone who had ever been silenced by fear. When the verdict came in, the courtroom held its breath. The jury found Marcus Carter guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The weight of the decision reverberated beyond the courtroom walls. It marked a turning point for Oak Ridge, a small town, forced to confront how deeply abuse can be buried behind appearances. In the weeks following the verdict, Evelyn's story inspired changes. A local foundation was formed in her name, providing housing and legal aid for survivors of domestic violence. Schools began hosting awareness programs, and community leaders pledged to do more. Her name became a symbol, not of tragedy, but of truth, finally brought into the light. And for Jonah, it was closure. The case that had consumed him for months had ended, but its lessons would last a lifetime. Scars don't always fade, but with enough courage, they can be seen. They can speak, and they can lead to change. After the trial concluded and Marcus Carter was sentenced, the town of Oak Ridge began the long process of healing. But for Detective Jonah Reed, the end of the legal battle wasn't the end of the story. Something about Evelyn Carter's life and death continued to weigh on him. He had solved the case, but questions lingered in his mind. What more could have been done? Who else had failed her? And why had a community known for its closeness been blind to the warning signs? Jonah returned to the Carter home one final time, not for evidence, but for understanding. The house, now vacant and under city possession, still held echoes of the life Evelyn once lived. Her books remained on a shelf, her perfume faint in the hallway. In the kitchen, the tiles had been scrubbed clean, but Jonah could still see the dark stain that had started it all. He stood there quietly, trying to picture her final moments, what she might have thought, where she might have turned to run, how scared she must have been. He walked through the rest of the house and eventually entered the small study Marcus used as an office. It had been overlooked in previous searches because it held no clear connection to Evelyn. But now, Jonah felt compelled to look deeper. In a locked drawer, which they had previously broken open but skimmed through quickly, he discovered a small journal, written not by Marcus, but by Evelyn. The journal was filled with entries written over the past year, some long, others just a few lines. It painted a haunting picture of emotional abuse, gaslighting, and isolation. She wrote about how Marcus would monitor her calls, question every interaction she had, and blame her for things that never happened. The psychological control had been as devastating as the physical violence. One line stood out. "If anything happens to me, let this be proof that I tried." Jonah sat for a long time reading Evelyn's words. They weren't written in panic, but in quiet resignation. She had known what might come. She had feared it, even expected it. And yet, she had still hoped for escape. She had reached out, planned, tried to leave, all while carrying the burden in silence. The journal was not just evidence, it was her voice, her final testimony. He submitted the journal into the public record, ensuring her story would be preserved in her own words. It was a powerful document that later became central to advocacy campaigns and educational programs across the state. Survivors of domestic abuse shared how Evelyn's story mirrored their own, and how reading her journal gave them the courage to speak up. Oak Ridge transformed slowly. The police department established a new domestic violence response unit, trained to recognize early signs of abuse and equipped to act with speed and sensitivity. Shelters received increased funding, and a local nonprofit began offering free legal assistance to those trapped in unsafe relationships. Evelyn's legacy became more than a memory. It became a movement. Jonah continued his work, but something had changed in him. Every case he took now passed through a different filter. He listened more closely, observed more deeply, and refused to dismiss even the smallest red flags. He had always considered himself thorough, but now he understood the cost of missing subtle cries for help. 1 year after the verdict, a memorial garden was built near the town library. At its center stood a plaque with Evelyn Carter's name and a quote from her journal. "Even if I'm afraid, I still want to live." People gathered there often, some to mourn, others to reflect. Survivors left notes at the base of the plaque, sharing their stories or expressing gratitude. The space became sacred ground, not for the tragedy, but for the hope that followed. On the anniversary of her death, a vigil was held. Hundreds gathered, candles in hand, their faces lit by soft flames. Jonah stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as Evelyn's parents spoke about their daughter's kindness, her love for music, and her quiet strength. They thanked the town for not forgetting her. They thanked Jonah for never giving up, as I. The crowd stood in silence. The sun dipped below the horizon. For the first time in a long while, Jonah felt a measure of peace. Justice had been served, but more importantly, change had begun. Evelyn's life had not ended in silence. Her scars, though deep, had become symbols of truth, truth that now guided a town toward compassion, awareness, and action. The story of Evelyn Carter, once hidden behind walls and shadows, now lived in the open. It reminded people that some wounds may never fully heal, but they can teach us. They can move us. And most of all, they can help others find the strength to escape before it's too late. In the end, Evelyn's voice, once stifled by fear, spoke louder than ever before.